Dr. Cale Marin pressed his palm against the viewport of the transport vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the alien world of Xerion Prime grow larger beneath them. The planet's surface rippled with crimson forests and jagged mountain ranges that looked like the spine of some sleeping titan. According to the survey reports, this world harbored the galaxy's most feared apex predators, the Thalrex. "You sure about this, Doc?" Captain Mira Solon asked, checking her pulse rifle for the third time that morning. Her weathered face carried the scars of a dozen military campaigns, each one teaching her that violence was often the only language the universe understood. "These creatures have torn apart 3 separate expeditions. The mining consortium is offering us triple hazard pay for a reason." Cale adjusted his field pack, heavy with medical supplies and recording equipment rather than weapons. At 42, his graying temples and gentle eyes made him look more like a university professor than a xenobiologist venturing into one of the galaxy's most dangerous territories. "That's exactly why I need to be here, Mira. Fear breeds more fear. Someone has to break the cycle." The ship's AI announced their descent into Xerion Prime's atmosphere. Through the viewport, Cale could see the mining operation's temporary base, AIG's cluster of prefabricated structures surrounded by defensive barriers. Beyond the perimeter, the crimson forest stretched endlessly, hiding creatures that had become legends of terror across known space. As they disembarked, the expedition leader briefed them on recent attacks. 3 miners had vanished just 2. Days prior, their equipment found scattered and mangled near the forest edge. The Thalrex left no bodies, only evidence of their incredible power and territorial fury. "We're here to establish a secure perimeter and begin resource extraction," the leader explained. "Dr. Marin, your job is to find ways to repel or eliminate the threat these beasts pose." Kyle shook his head firmly. "My job is to understand them. There's a difference." That evening, as the base settled into an uneasy quiet, Kyle stood at the perimeter fence, studying the forest through his night vision equipment. The Thalrex were out there. He could sense their presence like electricity in the air. These weren't mindless monsters. They were intelligent, social creatures defending their territory. Tomorrow, while the miners focused on extraction, he would focus on connection. Captain Solon joined him at the fence, her own equipment scanning for heat signatures. "You know, Doc, I've seen what fear does to people. It makes them do terrible things, but I've also seen what happens when you underestimate a predator." "Fear is a choice, Mira," Kyle replied softly, "and so is trust." In the distance, a haunting call echoed through the crimson trees, deep, resonant, and unmistakably intelligent. It wasn't the roar of a mindless beast, but something far more complex. It sounded almost like a song. The morning mist clung to the forest floor, like ghostly fingers as Cale ventured alone beyond the base perimeter. Against direct orders and Captain Solon's heated protests, he had disabled his communication beacon and left his defensive equipment behind. In his pack, he carried only medical supplies, recording devices, and a meal of native fruits he'd researched as safe for the planet's ecosystem. The Thalrex tracks were easy to follow, massive paw prints that sank deep into the rich, crimson soil. Each print was larger than Cale's entire torso, with claw marks that could easily rend metal. Yet as he followed the trail deeper into the forest, he felt no fear, only a profound curiosity about the intelligence behind such powerful creatures. The forest around him was alive with symphony. Strange bird-like creatures trilling in harmonious patterns, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, and somewhere ahead, the steady breathing of something much larger. Kyle moved slowly, deliberately, making no attempt to hide his presence. Stealth felt like deception, and deception was the enemy of trust. He found her in a clearing where golden sunlight filtered through the canopy. The Thalrex matriarch was even more magnificent than the expedition reports had described. Standing Nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, her body was covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to brilliant silver, depending on the angle of light. Her head was both reptilian and feline, with intelligent amber eyes that fixed on Kyle the moment he entered the clearing. Between her massive forelegs lay a smaller form, a cub, perhaps a quarter her size, but still larger than any Earth predator. The young Thalrex appeared to be injured, its left rear leg bent at an unnatural angle. The matriarch's low growl vibrated through the ground beneath Kale's feet. He could see her muscles tensing, preparing to defend her offspring. This was the moment that would determine everything. Would he respond with the instinctive human reaction of fear and retreat, or could he offer something different? Kale slowly lowered himself to the ground, making himself smaller and less threatening. He reached into his pack and withdrew the native fruits, placing them between himself and the great predator. Then he began to speak, his voice soft and melodic. "I know you don't understand my words," he said, "but maybe you can understand my intentions. Your cub is hurt, and I want to help." The matriarch's head tilted slightly, her amber eyes studying this strange, small creature that showed no fear, carried no weapons, and offered food instead of violence. Kyle continued talking, describing his own childhood, his love for all living things, his deep respect for the bond between parent and child. Minutes passed. Then, impossibly, the matriarch took a step back from her cub, her eyes never leaving Kale's face. It was an invitation, or perhaps a test. Moving with infinite care, Kyle approached the injured cub. The young Thalrex watched him with curious, intelligent eyes that held no trace of the legendary fury its species was known for. As Kyle gently examined the injured leg, the cub made a soft chirping sound, almost like a purr. The leg was broken, but not severely. Using supplies from his pack, Kale carefully set and splintered the injury, while both mother and cub watched in fascination. Throughout the process, he continued talking, sharing stories of his own world, his own species' journey from fear to understanding. When he finished, the cub nuzzled against his shoulder with surprising gentleness. The matriarch approached and, in a gesture that would be remembered across the galaxy, lowered her massive head and touched Kale's hand with her snout. Trust had been offered. Trust had been accepted. Word of Dr. Marin's unprecedented contact with the Thalrex spread through the mining base like wildfire. Captain Solon found herself torn between military protocol, demanding his immediate extraction, and scientific curiosity about his remarkable breakthrough. For 3 days, Kyle had returned to the forest clearing, each time strengthening his bond with the matriarch and her cub. The young Thalrex, whom Kyle had begun calling Ravi after an ancient Earth word meaning sun, had made remarkable progress. The cub's leg was healing well, but more importantly, Ravi had begun following Kale around the clearing, mimicking his movements and even attempting to replicate the sounds of human speech. "This changes everything we thought we knew about interspecies communication," Kyle reported during his evening briefings, his excitement barely contained. "The Thalrex aren't just intelligent, they're emotionally sophisticated. Ravi shows empathy, curiosity, even what I can only describe as affection." Captain Solon studied the video recordings Kale had captured, watching in amazement as the fearsome predator cub played with him like an enormous scaled puppy. "Doc, this is incredible. But the consortium's investors are getting nervous. Every day without mining operations costs them millions. They're talking about bringing in heavy artillery." The thought made Kale's blood run cold. "Mira, if they attack the Thalrex now, we'll lose everything. These creatures could be humanity's greatest allies in the galaxy, not our enemies." The next morning, Kale arrived at the clearing to find chaos. Ravi was pacing anxiously, while the matriarch stood rigidly alert. Her scales darkened to their most threatening coloration. Something was wrong. Through his growing understanding of Thalrex body language, Kale realized they were trying to warn him. The matriarch kept looking toward the forest's edge and making low, urgent sounds. Following her gaze, Kale spotted movement. In the trees, human figures in military gear, moving with the coordinated precision of an assault team. The mining consortium had made their decision. They were coming to eliminate the threat. Kyle's mind raced. He activated his emergency beacon, hoping to reach Captain Solon before the situation escalated beyond control. But as armed figures emerged from the forest, weapons raised, he realized he might be too late. The matriarch positioned herself between the humans and her cub, her massive form radiating barely contained power. But this wasn't the mindless fury the expedition reports had described. This was a mother protecting her young, displaying the same fierce love that drove parents of every species across the galaxy. "Stand down!" Kale shouted, placing himself between the soldiers and the Thalrex. "These creatures aren't attacking, they're defending their family." The lead soldier's voice crackled through his helmet comm. "Dr. Marin, step away from the hostile entities. We have orders to neutralize the threat." The standoff stretched across the clearing like a taut wire ready to snap. 8 armed soldiers faced off against one massive Thalrex matriarch, her injured cub, and a single unarmed human who refused to step aside. The tension was palpable. One wrong move would shatter the fragile bridge of trust that had taken days to build. Captain Solon's voice crackled through the team leader's comm. "Hold your positions, I'm en route." Kyle could feel Ravi trembling beside him, the young Thalrex's natural instincts warring with the trust he had learned to place in humans. The matriarch remained statue still, but her scales were slowly darkening to their most aggressive coloration. She understood the threat these newcomers represented, but she also understood that Kyle stood between them and her cub. "Listen to me," Kale called out to the soldiers, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "What you're seeing isn't aggression, it's protection. This mother is doing exactly what any human parent would do." The team leader kept his weapon trained on the matriarch. "Sir, these creatures have killed mining personnel. We have orders." "Your orders are based on misunderstanding," Kyle interrupted. The Thalrex who attacked the miners were defending their territory from what they saw as invaders. But this family has learned to trust. Ravi here, he gestured to the cub beside him, has been healing under my care. They're not monsters, they're people. A commotion in the forest announced Captain Solon's arrival. She emerged from the trees with her sidearm holstered, her hands visible and non-threatening. Her eyes took in the scene, the soldiers, the Thalrex, and Guile standing between them like a living treaty. "Stand down," she ordered her team. "Ma'am, the creatures are exhibiting protective behavior, not aggressive behavior," Solon said firmly. "Look at their posture. Dr. Marin is right." As if responding to the change in human behavior, the matriarch's scales began to lighten slightly. Ravi took a cautious step forward, his large eyes moving between the soldiers and Kyle. The cub made a soft chirping sound, the same greeting he had begun using whenever Kale arrived at the clearing. "Incredible," Captain Solon breathed. "It's trying to communicate." Kale nodded, relief flooding through him. "Ravi has been learning to mimic human sounds. Watch this." He made a gentle clicking sound with his tongue, a noise he had discovered the Thalrex used to express contentment. Ravi immediately responded with the same sound, then moved closer to nuzzle against Kyle's shoulder. The transformation in the soldiers was immediate. Weapons slowly lowered as they witnessed the undeniable bond between human and alien. The matriarch, sensing the change in atmosphere, stepped forward and did something that would be recorded in xenobiological history. She extended her massive head toward Captain Solon in a gesture of greeting. Solon looked at Kyle, who nodded encouragingly. With infinite care, the battle-hardened captain reached out and gently touched the great predator's snout. The matriarch's scales shimmered with patterns of gold and silver. Colors Kyle had learned indicated pleasure and acceptance. "My God," one of the soldiers whispered, removing his helmet. "They're beautiful." Over the following days, word of the breakthrough spread beyond the mining base. The consortium's board of directors, initially furious about the delayed operations, found themselves facing something unprecedented. Not just a successful first contact, but the possibility of an alliance with one of the galaxy's most powerful species. Ravi became the unofficial ambassador between human and Thalrex communities. Other Thalrex families began approaching the mining base's perimeter, drawn by the young cub's excited reports of the strange but friendly creatures who had helped heal his injury. Each encounter followed the same pattern: initial wariness, giving way to curiosity, then cautious acceptance, and finally genuine affection. The mining operation was redesigned to work in harmony with Thalrex territory. In return for respecting certain sacred groves and nesting areas, the Thalrex offered their protection and even their assistance, their incredible strength proving invaluable for moving heavy equipment through difficult terrain. But the real magic happened with the cubs. Young Thalrex, who grew up seeing humans as friends rather than threats, developed a completely different relationship with the galaxy's most widespread species. They learned to play games that crossed species barriers, to communicate through a mixture of sounds and gestures, and most importantly, to see diversity as strength rather than threat. 6 months after first contact, Zerion Prime had become a model for interspecies cooperation that attracted observers from across the galaxy. The once feared Thalrex hunting grounds had been transformed into a thriving community where human children played alongside Thalrex cubs, and where ancient predatory instincts had given way to protective friendship. Dr. Kyle Marin stood in what had once been a clearing where he first met Ravi's mother, now expanded into a beautiful park where both species could gather safely. Ravi, fully grown but still playful, was teaching a group of human children the Thalrex hunting dance, a complex series of movements that had been adapted into a celebration of life rather than a prelude to death. Captain Mira Solon approached, carrying a datapad filled with reports from across the galaxy. "The Interstellar Council is calling it the Zerion model," she said with a smile that had replaced her perpetual military scowl. 17 different worlds have requested your consultation for their own first contact situations. Kale watched as a human toddler climbed onto Ravi's back for a ride, the massive Thalrex moving with incredible gentleness to ensure the child's safety. "It was never about me, Mira. It was about choosing trust over fear, understanding over violence." The success at Zerion Prime had indeed sparked a revolution in how humanity approached alien species. The old model of conquest and domination was being replaced by one of cooperation and mutual respect. Young humans growing up on integrated worlds developed an intuitive understanding of interspecies communication, while alien cubs learned to see humans as potential friends rather than threats. The economic benefits were staggering. Thalrex assistants had increased mining efficiency by 300%, while their intimate knowledge of Zerion Prime's ecosystem had led to the discovery of previously unknown resources. More importantly, the psychological benefits were immeasurable. Both species had found something they hadn't even known they were missing: true companionship across the vast loneliness of space. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the cubs themselves. The young Thalrex, who had grown up with human contact, were different from their elders. more curious, more adaptable, more willing to explore new possibilities. They were teaching their own offspring that the galaxy was full of potential friends rather than inevitable enemies. As the twin suns of Xerion Prime began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kale felt a familiar presence beside him. Ravi's mother, now known affectionately as Matara, settled her massive form next to the small human who had changed her world. Her scales shimmered with the contented patterns that had become as familiar to the human community as their own children's laughter. A new group of young Thalrex approached, their scales bright with excitement. They had heard stories of other worlds, other species, other opportunities for the kind of friendship they had discovered here. Some were already volunteering to accompany human exploration vessels, eager to serve as ambassadors for their species. "What do you think, Matara?" Kale asked, gently stroking the great predator's snout. "Ready to help us teach the galaxy that the fiercest hearts often hold the greatest capacity for love?" The matriarch's response was a deep, harmonious sound that had no direct translation in human language, but which every person on Xerion Prime had learned to understand perfectly. It meant yes, but it also meant hope, trust, family, and future all at once. As night fell over the planet, human and Thalrex families settled in together, their children, both species, playing in the gathering darkness under stars that no longer seemed cold and distant, but warm and welcoming. The galaxy had become a smaller, friendlier place, one friendship at a time. The legend of how humans won the hearts of the galaxy's fiercest beasts would be told for generations, but the real story was still being written in the daily lives of children who had never known a world where love was limited by the shape of one's body or the planet of one's birth.